And hello everyone, this is part 17 of our ComputerCraft series. Today I'm a little bit sick, so sorry if you can hear that, and if you can, then please bear with me. This is not going to be a very long episode for obvious reasons, but in this episode we are going to look back on pretty much code that I've made before I did this ComputerCraft series. That is roughly 3-4 months before I started this series. And that is basically a turtle script which was accessible from a distance. So you could put down a lot of turtles and start them at the same time, let them move exactly the same way at the same time, and that sort of stuff. So that was the plan behind that script. And we are just going to look at it and see how far we have come, what we have improved, and also what we might be able to learn from it. So yeah, I did find my code eventually, and we will be looking at this code, see what we have done in the past. And there might be a few Dutch comments here and there in it, but I'm not entirely sure if that is the case anymore. I think everything should be in English, but if there is, then I will do a quick translation from it. We will be going through what we used at the time, our Brave API, which will seem somewhat familiar by what we are used to. Maybe we see something that we can learn from, which didn't go wrong in the past, and maybe that is useful. So let's take a look at it. Let's zoom in a bit, something like that. And of course, it was a turtle script. So the first thing that we will be seeing is our refuel script. Refuel to given fuel level. This should be somewhat the same as what we are doing today. The only difference is that we have specified the slot to be slot 16. And at that time I was a little bit more flexible with it, and allowed it to go from pretty much 1 to 14. I believe 15 was torches and 16 was a chest or an ender chest. It's kind of the inventory that I used for that. Just going through all of it, and as soon as it finds a refuel be available, then it will set a slot to it. I believe that slot is also returned, so that inventory slot was excluded by clearing the inventory. That was kind of the idea for that. Some transmitting stuff. At the time we did have a central computer going on that was able to receive information. It wasn't doing anything with it aside from printing it on the screen, so we could see on the central place what was going on. So it would transmit refuel, and then how many items there are left in the particular fuel slot. There is one flaw with this concept, and it is if we, for example, mine into a mine shaft, it will try and search for the first item, which can be a fence or wooden planks, which don't have as much fuel units. So then it would go more often through its refuel function, which isn't efficient. Another drawback is that it will dispose any better fuels that are further into its inventory. So it wasn't ideal. And if send fuel level is false, or is true, apparently we set that true somewhere. That was happening when no items were found. So needs fuel, that's what he was yelling to the central computer. That's kind of what we did. This is just for displaying a screen. We did have a screen with an interface and everything inside the turtle. We don't have that today. We will be making that somewhere in the future. But basically what we did was opening a file which was containing a table with all the information for the screen. That's why there's an unserialized after that, closing it and then writing all of that down. Then there's a function that I'm going to skip for now. We'll be going back to that in a moment. Something the same one this is one we're going to hide for now. Highlight buttons. I was trying to do something with buttons. So if you click on a button, for example, or select it with your keyboard, that would light up for half a second or so. Didn't implement it in the end, but that was the idea. This is the forward. Move the turtle forward with defense. So this is while it is going forward. This is kind of what we are doing today. But today is the difference that we are attacking every single time if it cannot mine and cannot go forward. And back in the day we only did that one every 5 attempts, which isn't really that efficient. And a sleep of 1 second. We know by now that that is not necessary. Just an hold up in the program. For up, the same thing. For down, the same thing. Digging gravel, we do have that implemented nowadays. In the past, in the past I mean years ago, gravel was an issue. Nowadays the turtle is slightly smaller than a block, so gravel itself will break when it falls on top of the turtle. Still, it isn't really that ideal. So we did implement a sleep for that. And that's basically done in every single dig. That is a little bit inefficient. So we do this only when we have to move or when we have to go up. Make it a bit more efficient. This is our store resource function. Should look relatively familiar to what we are doing today. But the only difference is that we import it nowadays from a config file, but the idea is somewhat the same. Let's see. So first we do our full refuel function. That's just to get the fuel slot. So every time that we store an item, we are also going to refuel and going through the inventory, and if n, so the slot that we are going in at the moment, isn't equal to the fuel slot, it just drop down and will be fine. Nowadays we place ender chests on top of the turtle. Oh, actually, oh, that's also what we are doing here. So if it is false, so not ender chest, so then down. Something we do just as well today. And then if ender chest is true, it is actually placing it in front, apparently. Or turning to the left, yeah, that's also an option. Turn to the left, then place in front of it, which is normally where gravel is falling down. Okay, that was rather clever now I think of that. Fuel slot is refuel slot +1. I have no clue why we did that, but it must have been working. Function.transmit. This is a really simplified version of what we are currently using in our transmit protocol. The idea is the same. The only difference is that we send a whole lot of more information with our message itself. Since now we are only transmitting the message, but in our present scripts we are, for example, transmitting the day, the time, what type of PC it is, and a whole bunch of basically overhead, but it will work. It will help us later on. Test for modem to find the location of the modem. Kind of what the exact same thing that we are doing nowadays. Maybe it is written down slightly different. The idea is the same. Test for wireless. Those are two things that we have combined. So nowadays we get the side of the modem back, and if it is wireless or wired, depending on what we asked for it. That's kind of combined. And then adding a modem. Yeah, not really too fancy. GPS distance at the time, as you can see, function is still empty. It's obsolete. Apparently it has been replaced. We were working with GPS coordinates. I'm pretty sure that we will be doing that in the future, since it is quite handy to find your turtles back. And subtract vectors. That's something that we did for, I think, why did we do that? Subtract vectors. There must have been a good reason for that. And calculating the absolute value of a vector. A vector is pretty much a notation for your coordinates. So the coordinate system is in those vectors. And the absolute value, that must have been the trick. So we have a vector, which must have been this vector, called by the original program. Then we have the math square root, and this is basically Pythagoras' theorem. Basically what we are doing there. So this is the famous x squared, for example, and the y squared and the z squared, and that on the square root is Pythagoras' theorem. And that does give the distance from the turtle to the main GPS hub, which is still in the same place and is in our spawn chunks. So those are always loaded. Maybe we should place them a bit further apart, find a way to chunk load multiple chunks, and that way make it a bit more efficient, a bit more precise. So we have more, a bit bigger distance between the nodes. That's kind of the what we had there. And with this distance we could do several things, and for that I'm going back to those functions. So we could, for example, scan for turtles that are nearby. For that we had apparently a whole lot of information needed in here, which isn't really filled in for some reason. Okay, I have no clue. Oh, send to. Okay. I don't know. Oh, that's a table that are nearby in a grid of 5 by 5. Since that's what we used in our pocket computer, I think. So we have pretty much a starting ID and a finish ID, since there's no point in scanning for 1 to several thousand IDs. There's no point in doing that, unless you have absolutely no clue what you were doing or were searching for. But as you will see, it is a rather long function, especially the GPS parts of it will take forever. But if you were doing this for, let's say, 10, maybe 20 devices, it would work in a reasonable amount of time. But if you were doing this for like hundreds or thousands, then it could take well into several minutes to complete this loop. So there was no need for that. Also, still up to this day, we don't have up to 100 devices. So it still wouldn't be necessary to scan for all the IDs. So we are just sending pretty much information. We are waiting for an input. So we transmit. Just one is the receiving channel, I think, that's what I came up with. And number 2 would be the ID that we are looking for. Something on the other side was somewhat knowing of what to do with this function or with this table. So we would wait for an input, and if the input was a modem message, then cancel a timer. We did have a timer for this, which was on 2 seconds. I think it's 2 seconds. So if a device wasn't present, it would go onwards after 2 seconds. It could also be that the turtle was busy or PC was busy or whatever. So at least every 2 seconds it would go through all of this. So the type and whatever stuff, injecting it into a table, that sort of stuff, and then just go through all of this until we are at the finish. That's kind of the for loop ID. And then it should be inserted in one of those places. So we could later print that to a monitor or terminal. So insert nearby cell. This was by far the least efficient way of doing it. That's what I remember. And to be honest, I should really dive back into this part of my code to figure out why it was somewhat working sometimes. It was really horrible. And the same was kind of for the print nearby, same story. It was just asking for the insert cell nearby, which was asking for the GPS stuff. It was a mess, basically. So when we get to this point, we have to make this a little bit more clever. And then highlight buttons, and those are all the functions that we have already talked about. So that is pretty much a quick pass through all the stuff that we have done in the past. We can compare that to what we have nowadays, but I think that today we have made several different choices. For example, this fuel part is not in our code nowadays, but there's also no need for it since we only need to check one slot. And we did our inventory management a little bit easier. Less flexible, but easier. So that is kind of where I will be leaving it for today. As I mentioned, I'm not really feeling that well. I'm not going to talk here for longer than needed. In the next episode, we will jump back into the code that we were working on, and I would like to see you next time. Have a good day, night, evening. If you have learned something or like the series, drop a like, drop a follow, or subscribe, as it is called here on YouTube. And see you next time. Bye bye.